Marhaban. My name is Ian Campbell, and this series of 10 videos is the 5th series in a whole set of videos explaining the basics of how to speak, read, and write Al-Fusha, or Modern Standard Arabic. These videos will explore the basics of using verbs in Arabic. This last video will discuss some nouns and adjectives that we can derive from verbs. So we're going to have 3 main topics here, and the first one is called Ism al-Fa'il, which literally means the name of the doer. In English, we call this an active participle, a term you probably don't know, and what we mean is the person or object performing the action. Now, if you've watched these series of videos, I've talked about the fa'il pattern before as the person doing that thing, and I really mean the person or object doing that thing. They're extremely regular to form. If you know the verb's 3 root letters, put them in the fa'il pattern, letter number 1, alif, letter number 2, kasra, letter number 3, and it works every time. So this is very easy to do. They can be used as nouns or adjectives. In fact, standard Arabic grammar thinks of nouns and adjectives as being essentially the same thing. So they can denote people or objects, and if so, you make them feminine or plural in the standard ways. If you use them as nouns, a lot of them have irregular human plurals. So take amila. Amila means to work. It really means he worked. And so an amil is a worker. If the worker is a woman, she's an amila. The regular human plural is amilun, but a lot of them have irregular human plurals, so it happens to be ummal instead of amilun. If you said amilun because you didn't know ummal and you were just working on regular formation, absolutely everyone would understand you. Somebody might after a while correct you and be like, oh, hey, by the way, it's ummal. But everyone would understand you. It would be like saying, I have 3 childs. There's no barrier to communication there. If all of the workers are female, then you call them amilat. So we use the feminine plural at ending. If even one of them is a man, we call them ummal. And yes, we can rail about institutional sexism, but we don't have the time here to do that, so let's not. So these can be used as adjectives, and as such, they behave normally as well. So a katib, from kataba to write, is a writer, and nun jim ha means to succeed. So here we have a katib, a writer, and then a succeeder, and what we mean is successful. So sometimes it's a little ambiguous whether it's being used as a noun or an adjective, and you have to kind of squint at it a little bit and figure out what's really being said here. So a successful writer, if the writer's a woman, she's a katiba najiha. If they are successful writers, it has the same plural pattern as ummal. Kutab is writers. If you said katibun, everyone would understand you. And then najih is an adjective, so it's going to behave normally. And you're going to add the human plural ending un on it to make it successful writers, where at least one of them is a man. But if they're all women, we're going to say katibat najihat. The fun thing about human female plurals is that they always rhyme. So most of this is pretty easy. If you know the verb's 3 root letters, you could always form the ism fa'il. And if you come across an ism fa'il, you can usually back engineer it with the verb's 3 root letters to figure out what it means. Or at least you could know it's someone or something who is doing something, and that can often help you decode a sentence. So these are always regular, except sometimes for the masculine human plurals. They're generally pretty easy to use, and mostly they're the literal translation of that verb plus er. Sometimes you have to fudge it a little bit, like najih becoming successful instead of succeed-er. But this isn't really usually that big of a deal to work with when you're doing Arabic. In colloquial Arabic, not in formal Arabic very much, we use ism fa'ils as nouns in place of conjugated present tense verbs. So I can say in standard Arabic in Fusha, at-talib yafham ad-dars. The student understands the lesson. Fahima is to understand something. At-talib fahim ad-dars is what you might hear people say. The student is an understander of the lesson. All of these mean the same thing. Here the student is female. At-taliba fahimat ad-dars. So this is something that you will hear a lot when people speak, not so much when people write. You can get used to it fairly quickly once you learn the three root letters of the verb in question. This is kind of here for completeness purposes. You won't really see it very often at all in a written text, especially a formal text. But you will hear people say this a lot, so get used to it now before it confuses you. Let's move on to the next topic, what we call the ism maf'ul, the name of the done to. In English, a passive participle. Again, not a word that you're likely to have heard very often. But this is the person or object who's had the action performed on them. Not the person who did perform the object or action, but rather the person who's had the action performed upon them. So they also get formed really regularly. The ism fa'il, the one we just did, and the ism maf'ul are the fourth and fifth parts of the verbs when I talked all the way back at the beginning of this series about the 5 parts of a verb. If you know the verb's 3 root letters, just put them in the maf'ul pattern. Mim bi fatha, letter number 1 bi sukun, letter number 2, long vowel wow, letter number 3, and this works every time. So, for example, we have amila, to work. A lot of times when we give a verb, we'll give it in the he did it form with only the middle vowel because we know that the first and last ones are both fathas. So, amila is to work. Ma'mul, something that has been worked. Kataba, to write. Mektub, something that has been written. Fahima, to understand. Mafhum, something that has been understood. Talaba, to request, where we get a talib, a student, a requester from. Matlub, the thing that has been requested. So a lot of times these will have more idiomatic meanings than the literal meanings, and you just kind of have to get used to them. So yes, ma'mul means something that has been worked, but a lot of times it means stuffed in the context of a dessert, like a dessert with filling. Why it's called that, I don't know, it's just traditional. Maktub literally means written. You could say like the words that are written on this digital page. But it also means your fate, your destiny, like God has written things about you and that's what's doomed to happen. Fahima means, or mafhum rather, means understood, but it's usually used in Arabic to mean get it. Do you get it? Mafhum, just to make sure that you understand what the person is saying. You're literally saying understood to the person, which you could say in English as well, but you'd be more likely to say something like get it. Talaba, to request, but a matlub is really more like a demand. It's a little bit stronger. So you could get the general idea of the word from the 3 root letters and the maf'ul pattern, but sometimes these kind of take off in different directions idiomatically, and you just have to get used to them, and there's no real royal road to doing that. You just have to learn to do it. So as with the ism fa'il, the ism maf'ul can be used as nouns or adjectives, and they act normally in either case. So the verb wada'a means to put or place or put down something. So al-mawdu', the thing that has been put down, is the subject or topic, like the subject that you study in school, for example. So al-mawdu', noun, al-madrus, adjective, so the subject that is studied, the studied subject, you might say in English. A katiba is a writer, this is a woman this time, and she's ma'rufa. Ain rafa, arefa is to know something, so she's known, and we mean well known or famous. So once you kind of get the major ones that you learn, the common vocabulary words, and see how they differ a little tiny bit sometimes from the literal meaning, you'll get used to these pretty quickly. They're really not a problem to use, and they're really easy to form, so you shouldn't have any problems with them. And then lastly, we get to ism al-makan, the name of the place. Kaf wow noon is to be. So remember, when wow or ya are root letters, funny things happen. We had sa yakun for he will be in the last video. So here's al-makan, the place where you are is what it is. So the maf'al pattern is what we use here, and the plural is usually mafa'il. So for example, sabaha is to swim. So al-masbah is the swimming pool. It's plural. If we have multiple pools, it's masabih, and these form regularly. We know that kataba is to write, so a maktab is a writing place, and therefore either an office or a desk, depending on the context. Without the context, you don't know. Al-makatib, offices or desks. Sometimes we take the ism al-makan and we add ta marbuta to it to give a different spin on that particular word. So a maktaba is a different sort of writing place, a place where you find writings, a library or a bookstore, and then it's plural because it ends in ta marbuta. It takes alif ta as its plural, libraries or bookstores. So these are really easy to form and really useful. One tiny little nuance is that sometimes the verb's middle vowel in the present tense takes kasra rather than fatha or dhamma. So yajlis means he sits. And so a majlis, not majles. For historical reasons, it just forms this way. A majlis is a sitting place and therefore a council. So sometimes the meaning gets a little stretched beyond the literal meaning, but you'll learn the common vocabulary words and this won't be a big deal at all. This can vastly, all three of these, can vastly expand your range of expression. So wa'ada is the past tense to promise. It loses its waw in the present tense and takes kasra. And then so a maw'ad is a promise place and therefore an appointment. And I have an appointment at the dentist, which is why I've rushed through this one a tiny bit and maybe could have slowed down a bit. But you can learn these three things and they can vastly expand your range of expression. And with that, I'm going to say ma salama, goodbye.